Episode 34, Preparations. It was early in the morning. Cobal had slept little after the frightening battle with the Silver Star. The cabins of the Flying Croc were small and uncomfortable, and, like the rest of the ship, smelled of a mixture of wet, rusty metal and gasoline. Stone Shell Prison. The thought continued to run through his head as he struggled to get to sleep on his hard bunk, the sounds of the aircraft's old machinery clattering around him as the ship hovered in place over the ocean. This was a discovery beyond discoveries, Cobal thought as he lay on his back, staring up at the ceiling in the cabin's near-total darkness. When the Mushroom Kingdom fell, many of its heroes were captured at the Battle of Toad Town. The ones who escaped attempted to stage a final stand at Mushroom City, which turned into a month-long siege which ended in a victory for the Koopas. Even over a dozen hardened fighters and a healthy amount of willing, dedicated civilians could not hold out against the full might of the Koopa army. The stars must have smiled upon the heroes, though, since the one who was in charge of decided their fate was Bowser Jr. Cobal had heard it said that Emperor Bowser's heir, while spoiled and mischievous, at least when he had been young, was not cruel. Rather than execute the kingdom's greatest enemies, he had them transferred to a secure location where they were to be imprisoned for life. Presumably this had been the dungeons of Bowser's castle, but some time later this location had changed. According to Toadbert, a propaganda video put out a few years after the Koopas achieved complete world domination revealed that the heroes were now being held in Stone Shell Prison, a maximum security prison that had been designed by Ludwig von Koopa himself. Cobal knew the names of the heroes by heart. There was Captain Toad, Toadette's Love, Goombario, the Walking Encyclopedia, Dreambert, Ancient Prince of a Lost People, Parakari, the postman-turned-fighter. And of course, who could forget the great Gonzales Jr. Cobal had never met his father. Toadbert had a few pictures of him. He was a Yoshi with pink skin, and by the look on his face he was even more of a rebel than Cobal himself had ever been. The picture Cobal liked the most had shown his father standing on a stage with a triumphant, proud, and cocky grin on his face, hoisting up a large belt decorated with a huge orange star to the enjoyment of a crowd that packed the stadium. It was a picture of Gonzales after he had finished his legendary battle with Rockhawk for the championship. After he had won the title, Gonzales was said to have never lost a match. The training he had received when adventuring with Mario had put him way above the other fighters' levels. Cobal had tried many times to find videos of that match, or even a minute-long interview, anything would suffice. Unfortunately, the internet was extremely restricted under Imperial rule. As he was a former ally of Mario, the Empire had seemed it fit to try to erase him from existence. Cobal's father's internet presence amounted to a short Koopapedia article listing him as an ally of Mario. The great Gonzales Jr. was a terrorist who opposed Emperor Bowser and his children. He killed several Koopas during the war against the oppressive Mushroom Kingdom. After his defeat by the Crown Prince Bowser Jr., he was sent to Stone Shell Prison and is currently serving a life sentence. Cobal, of course, did not take the article's words to heart. While he supposed that his father could have killed some Koopas, it would have only been in the heat of battle, fighting in a desperate war to preserve the freedom of the Mushroom people. Toadbert had never known Gonzales personally, but he had known people who had, and they had said that while the Yoshi had been tough on the inside, he had been sweet, kind, a friendly deep down. Terrorist, indeed. The thought that Cobal could, in fact, meet his father face to face oddly made him feel more nervous than excited. When it was finally morning, Cobal made his way to the bridge. Everyone else was already there. The ocean spilled out before them, like a huge blue mirror. It was completely smooth and empty, with not even the slightest island on the horizon interrupting the endless blue.
I don't know, boss, I think we're in the middle of nowhere.
General Clump said dumbly, scratching at his head.
Yeah, it's like, just water, and water, and more water.
Krusha agreed.
That computer had no reason to lie,
Cobal said, stepping to the front of the bridge.
The tech was so advanced, it's stupid to assume it was glitched, and let's get real, no matter how strong that Black Kremling was, there was no way he could have predicted we'd come. They didn't plant the map for us to find it. Cobal's right.
Strike nodded.
It's at least worth a check.
Peasley compromised.
Well, if nothing's there, you're paying for gas.
K. Rool said, before yawning, showing on his yellow, pointed teeth. The flying croc continued over the commotion, its machinery rattling.
Best put on that cloaking device, just in case.
Strike urged, looking over Crush's shoulder at his console.
If Stoneshell Prison is nearby, we don't want to show up on their radar. Oof, I hate bullet bills.
Krusha agreed, flipping on the switch.
I dare say,
Peasley said, taking a few steps to K. Rool.
That cloaking device is a brilliant invention. How did you come to have it, when you're so, if you would allow me, impoverished? Ah, it was nothing.
K. Rool said, brushing it off.
Something from happier days, Bean Man. Some old robot man named Grotus was selling off a bunch of old tech, supposedly he was a big shot villain who wanted to retire. Got mixed up with Mario and ancient shadow demons and whatnot, decided world domination just wasn't worth it. Used half o' my treasury,
he said proudly, before his face fell.
Of course, maybe that was why the Koopas crushed us so easily. We didn't have enough coins to buy the cannonballs for our cannons.
Cobal had not been listening to the conversation too closely. He was paying attention to the simple radar map on the Flying Croc's dashboard. Supposedly Stoneshell Prison was, if you were to think of Isle Delfino, Kitchen Island, and Egg Island as a triangle, in the direct center of this triangle. They were approaching this spot now.
Guys,
said Clump, pointing at a black speck on the horizon.
We're coming up on something, and it looks big. By the banana horde, the boy was right.
K. Rool hissed, before turning to Cobal, his right eye bulging.
Now, tell me, Yoshi kid,
he said, jabbing a claw at Cobal's face.
How exactly do you intend to do anything about a maximum security Koopa Empire prison? You already put the Flying Croc in danger last night. I'm far too attached to this wreck to fly it into a storm of bonsai bills. K. Rool,
Strike said, crossing his arms. K. Rool turned away from Cobal and looked back at him.
Cobal doesn't have a plan,
he said calmly.
I do.
Cobal looked away from them and through the huge front window. There was a fortress approaching, although he couldn't make out any details yet. His heart began to beat. The most important thing that had happened to him since Luigi had recruited him could very well happen today. Luigi walked down the corridor in the Fire Flower base, his eyes hard. He barely saw the stone walls around him or the celebrating people that followed him to the main command room. The terrifying image of the cataclysmic explosion was fixed in his mind, the deafening noise still echoing through his ears. How had Yoshi done this? He had been kind and gentle. His oldest friend, who had helped save him from Kamek when he hadn't even been old enough to walk. He had led a peaceful life on his island, keeping the peace and eating fruits with his friends. Maybe this wasn't Yoshi, Luigi tried to convince himself. Maybe it was another green-skinned member of the species, impersonating him. Or what if it was a duplicate, manipulating the people of Fire Flower for some hidden scheme? Luigi's footsteps echoed through the hallway. He reached the entrance to the command chamber. Luigi flung the door open wide, the orange light from the huge fire flower symbol on the main screen spilling out onto him. A deafening cheer rose up from the people inside.
Wow, you really are a hero, Luigi. You beat that Koopa good. The Sand Kingdom is free, Luigi. I'm so happy I could cry.
It was like the cheers were not there. Luigi scarcely heard them as he walked between the desks to Yoshi, standing proudly in the center of the room, the purple-robed, green-capped Toad who he remembered was named Toadificus at his side.
Luigi!
Yoshi exclaimed.
I don't know what to say. Operation Broken Sunglasses was a complete success. We've dealt the Empire the biggest blow yet. If Mario could see you now.
Stop! Luigi said. He was surprised as the word came from his mouth, it felt unusually cold for him. Luigi blinked, looking at Yoshi with tears in his eyes.
Why? Yoshi!
He said, taking a few steps forward on shaking feet. The members of Fire Flower watched him, in confusion.
What? What was that?
Yoshi gave a deep sigh. He sounded tired.
Luigi! I know what you're thinking.
Yoshi said sadly.
But we had to do it. Roy was evil. If we hadn't have stopped him here, he would have destroyed hundreds of more lives in his and Ludwig's Neo-Empire campaign.
Yoshi looked up at Luigi. The orange light shone on his long, red scar. Luigi and Yoshi stood looking at each other for a long time. No, Luigi said finally, his voice shaking with emotion.
It wasn't right, Yoshi. There were innocent people there. Even if they were part of the Empire, they had lives. Just because Roy hurt people doesn't mean they did. I know.
Yoshi replied coldly.
Understand this, Luigi. I might not look like it, but I'm getting on in years. I was fighting the Koopa troop before you could walk and talk.
His eyes were cold and hard, and Luigi couldn't help think just how different they were from the eyes of the Yoshi he remembered.
I was optimistic, peaceful, and merciful. I tried not to kill anybody, even in the heat of battle, just like you two. But then the Koopas killed Mario, and they took over the kingdom. And then I realized that this was our fault. We had hundreds, if not thousands of chances to end things. We could have finished Bowser years ago.
His face became emotional as he took a few steps forward, placing a green hand on Yoshi's shoulder.
Think about it, Luigi. If we had just taken the next step and dealt with Bowser, and all his brats, Mario and the princess could have settled down. You could have settled down. You and Princess Daisy, Luigi. Everyone would be at peace, and there would be none of this Empire nightmare, none. This isn't the right way.
Luigi shook his head. He turned away from Yoshi, wiping away tears from his face.
Not even Bowser did something like this, at least back before he went crazy. If we act like this, Yoshi, how are we better than they are? If we wanted to make sure Roy couldn't come back, couldn't we have taken him prisoner?
His voice started to break as he turned back and looked at Yoshi. The tears were falling freely now, and Luigi's whole world seemed to be collapsing.
Even if we had to kill Roy, Yoshi, we can't punish his people for his crimes. There were families there, people like you, or me, or Mario. Mario failed the world.
Yoshi said coolly.
We can't be like him if we want to save it. I'm going to kill Bowser and all his brats and make them pay for what they did with this world. And if innocent people get caught in the way, Koopas, or Toads or whatever, their lives are a sacrifice worth making. With Neon City destroyed, there is no possible way the Koopa Empire can regain their hold on Sector 4, not with all this chaos. I wish Mario was here.
Luigi yelled, tightening his fists as he stared hard at Yoshi. The Fire Flower members looked at each other, nervously.
Maybe if he was with me, him and the princess, we could open your eyes.
With that, Luigi turned, feeling the eyes of Fire Flower trained on him.
Get me out of here,
he said weakly.
Transport Luigi back to the Mushroom Kingdom,
Yoshi ordered, sounding tired once again.
We shouldn't hold him hostage.
The Mushroom Kingdom. Yes, Luigi thought. That was where the real people who would bring down the Koopa Empire were. His new resistance, the Toad Brigade. Even Wario and Waluigi. But the thought of how far Yoshi had fallen, how they might never be reconciled, continued to beat at him as he was led to the airship, worse than 100 thwomps. Koopa High Command sat around their table, their faces tense. They knew little of what to think about the destruction of Neon City. It was good that one of the Neo Empire's power bases had been destroyed, but the idea that Fire Flower had such a powerful weapon in their possession was frightening. On the balcony above the council table where the 9 thrones stood, 4 of them were filled. Bowser Jr., seated at the right hand of the huge, spiked throne that was reserved for the Emperor, spoke up.
All right,
he said, glancing at the holographic images hovering above the council table. They showed a massive crater in the desert, strewn with debris.
This is the first time we've all met together since Ludwig, Larry, and Roy started all of this. I'm worried that if this war continues, things could get much worse.
All of the generals at the table nodded.
Yeah. I'm really worried, Junior.
Morden spoke up from his throne, which was silver with a red cushion. The large Koopa's face, despite its fearsome appearance, was creased with worry and even a bit of fear.
My army is being pushed back. We're giving it all we got, but...
He shook his head.
It's just too much. Plus, Ludwig's new weapons are really something.
Iggy spoke up, nervously adjusting his glasses.
The technology on them is insane. They can cut through my warships like they're nothing. Because Ludwig's been so withdrawn the last few years, his private army is way more advanced than ours. Even if we've got more troops and more funding. In short, I'm not sure if we can win this. They're nearly at my capital.
Lemmy agreed. Even though he had the build of a mature Koopa now, he was still tiny in comparison to his siblings.
I'm thinking about leaving my castle and staying here at the Citadel. Sector 6 is finished. Let's not give up yet.
Bowser Jr. shouted, standing up and looking over the council table below him. He had to admit that Ludwig's plans were making him nervous. The idea that he and his siblings could lose everything to the Neo Empire was a frightening thought. But Bowser Jr. knew he had to put up a brave face. He was the heir to the Koopa throne. One day, he would lead his people.
We're the Koopa troop. We've survived the Shroop invasion, abductions by crazed counts and deranged Beanish scientists. Even Mario himself. Let's not let Ludwig think we're scared. They'll be weak now that Neon City has been destroyed.
Grand General Sheldon looked up from his seat at the head of the table.
If you wish, Prince Bowser Jr., I can gather our forces together and mount a full-scale assault. We can take out Ludwig's Mountain Palace and Larry's Hooktail Castle out in one fell swoop. That will effectively end the war, my lord. Good.
Bowser Jr. nodded, sitting back down on the throne. He didn't like this at all. Ludwig had always been arrogant, but there had been times in their youth where they had really, truly loved each other as they schemed against the Mario brothers. If he had any choice in the matter, he and Ludwig would be working together to bring the Koopa Empire to the next level. He could only hope that this one next maneuver, a strike with a fleet composed of his, Iggy's, Morton's, and Lemmy's fleets, would end the war. Perhaps his devotion to the Empire's safety could finally reawaken his father's spirit. If only it was that easy, Bowser Jr. reflected morosely. Ludwig von Koopa sat on his golden throne, looking down at the newcomer in his throne hall. The hall was decorated in an ornate way like the rest of the palace, with dark blue carpet and blue drapes. Massive golden chandeliers with flickering candles hung from the vaulted ceiling, and, behind Ludwig's throne was an excellently painted portrait of himself. On either side of Roy were Larry, and a very disgruntled-looking Roy. Ludwig was looking down from his dais at the female Koopa who was standing before his throne. Wendy O. Koopa had grown taller, but her body had a more thin, feminine shape compared to the stocky male Koopalings. She had as little hair as ever, although, Ludwig noted with some contempt, her bow seemed to be twice as big.
"Thank you for joining us, dear sister."
Ludwig smiled.
"You have made the right decision."
Wendy smirked.
"Thanks, Ludwig,"
she said.
"You are going to give me the best room in the palace while I stay here, right?" "Naturally,"
Ludwig replied.
"In fact, I've even given the chefs an order to prepare a feast in your honor." "Excellent,"
Wendy laughed.
"See? Junior would never do something like this, and Daddy just doesn't pay attention to me anymore. Knock him back in line for me,"
she ordered in her typical snobbish, demanding tone. Ludwig smiled. His sister was so stupid. She could be satisfied by nearly any shallow pastime. As long as he indulged her, he'd have access to all of her armies. That, combined with his airship Mark IIIs, of which mass production had already begun, could be the vital thing which could push his father's armies to the limit. Yes, everything was going perfectly. Ludwig rose from his throne and walked down the short flight of stairs, his cape flowing behind him.
"I trust you'll enjoy your stay,"
he said to Wendy as he passed her.
"Remember, I like my lobster with crushed fire flowers,"
Wendy replied, apparently caring more about the potential banquet than the military opportunities she had granted the Neo-Empire. With these boosts, there was no possible way he could benefit any more from his unpleasant partnership with 7 Stars.
"Oh, Larry?"
he asked, turning around to look at his younger brother.
"Yeah, bro?"
Larry asked. Ludwig's face curved in a cruel smile.
"Tell the Lady Krizina that she is no longer welcome here. I don't approve of her using my palace for her private meetings and I think her organization has outgrown its usefulness."
Larry chuckled.
"Can't object to that,"
he said cheerfully. Ludwig turned and began to walk out of his throne room. Larry's spies were in place. Everything was going according to plan. Soon, the Koopa Empire would fall.